Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Doomer Optimism podcast. I have fancy earrings on today, if anyone's watching the video. Okay, so I'm here with Robert. I'll have Robert introduce himself. I love these kinds of conversations. Basically, I'm like musing on Twitter about something that I'm on about at the moment, one of my 5 topics I talk about. And then I come across somebody who's got like a really interesting perspective on the thing that I'm like wrestling with, and then we, schedule a podcast and talk about the thing that we were talking about on Twitter, which I think is fun and nice, and it's nice to talk long form about these things you can only kind of grapple at a little bit on Twitter. So I'll have you introduce yourself, Robert, and then we can talk a little more about like the point of the conversation today, or what started it, what prompted it.
Sure. So name's Robert. I'm known as Plasma or PlasmaRob or Dr. Plasma on the internet. I've been under that guise since I was a kid, basically. We're talking 2002. So
Wow.
that's yeah. So don't dox me, bro. But yeah, all those forms. But I'm a father of 3. I'm a senior QA engineer I work in software. I've been writing code since I was a kid, though, so it's an interesting thing. I joke in professional spaces that I'm QA by day, dev by night, and I've actually started a startup company working on what I think could be the future of communication in the technology space, and that's a longer conversation, and it's all still stuff that's work in progress right now. But yeah, so that's kind of me in a nutshell. I've got a strong background in religion. Was always a religious kid growing up. Was reading the King James version by myself at like 6 or something. I was one of those crazy kids, and then I was also really interested in computer science, and I have a degree from BYU, Idaho, in computer science. And so I'm interesting because I'm in the tech spaces, and I'm also somebody who has a very strong religious. You could think of someone like with the seminary degree or whatever. So I am very interested in kind of the fusion of science and religion in a way that makes both. So a lot of people on one side or the other kind of look at me funny, like what's going on with here?
Yeah, right. Yeah, so this is basically like why we connected, and
Mhm.
can talk a little bit about my own perspective here to get us started. I came across this little infographic basically that somebody shared with me on Twitter, which is this natural law versus man's law dichotomy. I will say for the record, and actually like I'm kind of starting to get in trouble a little bit on some of the things I'm trying to talk about. I am so not theologically trained. So
When
I
you're when,
had,
when you're when you're in a video game and like you're like in a first person shooter, you're trying to go through the mission. Like when you're running into enemies, it usually means you're going the right way.
yeah,
The
right,
thing
well,
is,
that's true.
the danger is people like to online like to go like, well, I'm obviously right because I'm making people mad. When your goal is not to make people mad, which you are anyway, that's usually a good sign. You're like, no, guys, I think I figured something out here. And they're
Yeah,
like,
that's well,
you stop
and
now, right now.
that
And
is exactly what
that's
had
when.
happened to me on Twitter, where I'm like, I'm literally just trying to say even like basic things like, you know, most people should be able, or most women should be able to breastfeed. And then people like totally lost their mind when I say something like that. But I'm
Yep.
like, I'm not trying to make anyone mad. I like genuinely think we should feel empowered to do it. Anyways, so okay, so this natural law versus man's law thing, I'm getting into I'm reaching sort of the limits of my it, training or reading on the topic, because I'm like, basically I had growing up, I was like both Lutheran and Catholic, went to a Lutheran church with my mom's side, Catholic schools. But it was not like a really deep theological education. And now I'm going to church again, but I've kind of taken the approach. I know it's not PC to say, but I'm sort of like a retard Catholic. I just don't really want to read. I feel like reading so much about every topic, like you start literally reading about the history of religion is like the history of Western civilization. There's so
It
many
is.
interpretations
Yeah.
of the Bible and all of this stuff. So I almost felt like I just want to intuit my way into it. So having said that caveat, like it's hard for me to then talk about natural law without like really knowing situating that in like
You'll
the
never feel like you know enough.
no, I
Um,
know
the
that's the
uh,
other thing.
the thing. Let me. I come from a different perspective. I'm LDS, and the thing about us is we're also like heretics that the Catholics and
Right.
Orthodox would say you're in the Protestant camp, and the Protestants are like, no, you worship the devil, get out. But the thing is, like, our doctrine is actually very focused, and we agree with Catholics on priesthood and the nature of having God-chosen servants who run the organization, whereas
Right.
Protestants in general have to cope with not having that and go like, "Well, we just have the Bible. The Bible's the authority. The Bible." And they some of them more worship the Bible more than they worship Jesus, which is
So like,
once you
yeah,
realize that, you're like, "That's a little weird, guys." And it's like also you're afraid of the Old Testament. It's like, guys, we got to actually know this stuff. You can't just. It's not about winning arguments. It's about figuring out what the truth is in our relationship with Jesus Christ. That's Christianity. It's
yes,
not about
right. And
winning.
so,
It's about
right. Yeah.
and
So I mean, so I'm
I'm
having
in
a hard time
I'm
like,
the libertarian party of Christianity, I guess you'd say.
that's
So
funny. So
neither side likes me.
yeah, right, exactly. And so I'm kind of like intuiting my way through. I'm not really that interested in like the minutia of all the different
It's
schisms
the
of, you know
vibes,
what I mean?
which
Like,
is the
and
Holy Spirit or Holy Ghost. It's the vibes. You're trying to figure out
yes,
what's
exactly.
true.
So I'm
Yeah.
kind of vibes based found my way into sort of believing this concept of natural law, meaning, and a lot of my path there was more or less like spending time on a homestead and realizing a lot of the lies that are told about tech based food production, for example, are basically lies about what's happening with natural limits and energy and inputs and resources. And so like come up against this sort of rationalistic, mechanistic, man's law and what I would say understanding of how the world works. And
Mhm.
I said, and I have just come to realize, like, no, there are actual limits on these things, and much of what you're told as like a sort of scientific rationalist is actually just smoke and mirrors, with
It's
and
worse than
playing
it's
with
worse than
numbers in
that.
weird ways. Yeah. So, but
Yes.
you know both the tech side and the religious side.
I've
So,
tried
yeah,
to. I've tried to.
yeah. So let's dig into that a little bit.
Sure. Um, let me try and I guess back up is the way to say it. Let's do a quick like history according to me lesson of philosophy in the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries.
All right.
Um,
Perfect.
so so before postmodernism, how did we get? That's the question is how did we get here? And the answer you got to kind of rewind, and then people say, well, in World War II, like no, keep rewinding, go back, and so
Yes.
that's the you get into the derangement stuff. A lot of that's born out of there, but you go much further back. So uh, the Enlightenment, 1700s, 1800s. There was a time where Western civilization was fundamentally founded on Christianity. It was founded on this belief in God. There were various sects. You had Catholic, you had Protestant, you had the Lutheran groups, you had the Puritans. A lot of the religious persecution that was happening in Europe at the time actually was a significant contributor to the number of Americans who the colonies and the colonial bit that came over to America. And this is going to come back late. I'll bring this up later because this is relevant to modern American politics and how America became the global hegemon.
Uh,
But the what happened though is over time, um, from generation to generation, families from parents to children pass down their religion and their values in the time that they live in. One of the things that's happened over time is as particularly the Industrial Revolution, and the Civil War didn't help either. When you're in times of trouble, there can be this forking of what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. People who go through hard trials become more
uh,
religious. A lot of people go, how could there be a God if bad things happened? And they lose their faith. They turn against and they hate God and they want nothing to do with it. And there's interesting phenomena in these situations too. And this matters in Europe. But what happens is if a religion gets caught up in that, and heaven forbid, the general populace considers the religion had to have supported a regime that became the historical bad guys, like very quickly that thing is toast. And the
right.
thing
Okay.
is, that is people's relationship with God. That's an entire institution. There's a slight bit of feedback. I don't know if it's me. Um,
I don't hear it.
okay, I'll that's good. Uh, it's gone now. Don't worry. So anyway, the once you start, so that's the foundation is start seeing that. So here's what happened. We had two world wars, and before that, we had various other conflicts in Europe. And particularly some of the things that happened in France, French Revolution, the Russian with Tsar Nicholas, and during these time periods is when you see some of these thinkers, Marx and Lenin, Nietzsche is a bit earlier, but it's in that bucket. And Nietzsche is actually really important to the modern atheist and the 2000s, 2010s new atheist movement. This proclamation that God is dead, and what Nietzsche was saying, as far as I can tell, and I'm a fan of Jordan Peterson. If you're familiar with some of Jordan Peterson's work, he talks about this, that what Nietzsche was trying to get across is that essentially somewhere along the line, the belief system, Christianity, went the wrong way. Something horrible happened. And as far as people were concerned, God is dead. And I think the extended part of the quote is something along the lines, and there's no conceivable way to wash away the blood from that. And the hope that Nietzsche had was that perhaps we could be able to create our own values in substitute for religion. Now, that is really important because Nietzsche is very big in the atheist movement, and that is I would say the foundation, the shaky, if you're a Christian, sandy foundation stone for postmodernism. So it is this idea that things, okay, so we don't have things. So if you go look up I've had some interesting arguments with people who are ostensibly better read than me, but just go look up the Wikipedia article on postmodernism. Like, postmodernism fundamentally is the rejection of meta narratives. Now, what is a meta narrative? So so my Substack, not to shill it, but my focus of interest is the meta, because in computer science we do like recursion and computer code, and there's all of these different ways that you can look at things, and one of them is like the OSA model in network stacks, where you have the physical layer of the actual ones and zeros, and
Mm-hmm.
like that doesn't actually matter how you do it. You still get the same computer program, whether you're using Starlink radio waves or Wi-Fi, or whether you're using copper cable, or whether you're using fiber optic. It doesn't matter what the medium is. You can pick any medium, but as long as things are consistent up the different layers of how you connect routers and how the network switches work, you can actually switch between technologies and still get the same ones and zeros across. This idea of abstraction up and down at different layers. Now, in meme culture and even in video game culture, there's what's called a meta, and meta is kind of going up a layer and looking down. So the meta for like an esports video game is talking about, well, which characters are currently good right now. It's kind of the game above the game.
Got
And so
it.
my focus on meta, so when you turning back to meta narratives, so a meta narrative is the idea that a narrative, which, think of Shakespeare, and there's only 7 or 8 stories ever told, that there's the hero's journey in Joseph Campbell and his work. So all of these stories have something in common. That is what Joseph Campbell's argument was.
Right.
And meta narrative is the idea. So so postmodernism is fundamentally about rejection of meta narratives. It is not that these things are not real. There are just conflicting parties who have their own views, and those views are trying to find a way on top. And if you read the opening line to the Communist Manifesto, you will find that, oh wait, that's what that is. And so I'm not trying to say that postmodernists are all communists. You'd hear Jordan Peterson, his postmodern neo-Marxists, and like that. There's a relationship there, and
Yeah, there's some conflation of these terms too
yeah.
much. Yep.
Well, he says his argument is that Marxism and communism is fundamentally a meta narrative, which rejects meta narrative, and that is just like it's like, well, that's just your meta narrative, and
Yes.
it's essentially people fighting to be like the foundation underneath each other. If you're looking at the different movements, so the problem that we're living in now is and now turning to the art movement specifically, because that's relevant to the past 10 years. So in the 1960s, in the one of the problems with post World War II is because the U.S. was so friendly with Russia and or the USSR, or whatever we're calling them, as of that time period, in order to defeat the Nazis. We had the Nazis. Maybe we'll get more views. Nazis, it's Trump.
Yeah, we
But
gotta get to that.
yeah, we got to get to that. But the what happened is they a lot of French intellectuals and other people from those time periods came in. One of the people who was particularly helpful, and I put that in the biggest air quotes imaginable with that, is Woodrow Wilson. And that was through in the early 1900s through to World War II, there was an influx of intellectual thought coming from these Nietzschean postmodern ideals that came into the academic institutions and led to a lot of the sketchy policies, let's say, that FDR implemented. Woodrow Wilson and FDR both. But during the 1960s and art movement, we had the avant-garde, and this is essentially this is the Dadaists, and we're signing toilets. We've got Piss Christ, which came a little
Yeah,
bit later, but
yeah,
this is essentially the modern meme of the banana tape to a wall. Banana tape to a wall art is this postmodern idea that it's just like, what is art really? Who are
right.
we to say what is and is not art? And the problem is that one. The essentially in as far as art is concerned, in 1950s, 60s, communism and or postmodernism won. The Romantic era, the Wander Above the Sea of Fog, which is one of my favorite paintings.
Mm,
Minecraft has a reference to an artist who did something on it, basically. So that's an interesting little bit of lore. The most popular game of all time now that's surpassed Tetris has reference to the Romantic time period
yeah, that's
in the
nice.
art movement. Yeah,
Yeah.
so log that in your brain for a second. But so the thing that happened there is you had this postmodern takeover of the institutions. It all became the art money laundering, and
Yeah,
I'm
and
not.
not
And
just art, like
I
everything. It
yeah,
sort of broke every institution where it was to some extent like
art was
how
the most
far
vulnerable.
can we deconstruct and like the way it
Deconstruction,
the
Derrida in
deconstruction of
postmodernism is
and the
big. Yeah.
deconstruction to me like what is being deconstructed is a more universal understanding of how the world works, how, you know, what, you know, these meta narratives that humanity has sort of turned to throughout all of human history, this kind of, you know, immutable laws that are true, you know, whether or not you want them to be true. Before we get deeper into like the ways in which it's broken and like you know the result and all rationalism and all this stuff that I think people have kind of turned to rationalism as like a cope for the lack of like these I don't know and maybe I'll get
You
your
need a
take on that.
framework, and logic is one.
Yeah,
So
but then I'm wondering if we could go back a little bit because this maybe as somebody who's you know studied religion your life more than I have like I said um I'm struggling right now because I was at a conference, you know, that I helped organize last fall, and there was this conversation about, you know, is it just is Christianity, our Christianity and Western civilization basically tied up to the extent that, you know, like is Christianity the machine kind of thing? Or do you think that like Nietzsche and then these French intellectuals and the, you know, French Revolution and all this other stuff was sort of a clean break from Christianity? And there's like a sort of stream of Western culture, one of which is like natural law Christianity, another which is like postmodern and rationalist.
sure. So here's you've asked the right question that nobody likes to ask, because the answer is deadly, and the question is Christianity right?
Yeah, right.
Because the thing is, there are a lot of people who are not Christian who are not going to like that the idea that maybe Western civilization and the development of civilization actually was just the fruit of Christianity, and those who adhered, at least in name only, to Christianity and kind of kept Christian values, and when they kind of put those aside, then it collapsed. Like there's an interesting case to be made there that actually all of civilization as we know it, the developed world, is Christianity. And those who are of, I have friends who are of other persuasions, people who are more atheistic, people who are Jewish or Islam, and there's not going to like that answer.
Right.
That's really tough question. But I will say that for one's personal like life choices, this is actually where the rubber hits the road and where you start figuring out what is true. For intellectual academic sake, I will say that there are ways of getting around Christianity, and I would like to wonder why people are trying to get around Christianity in the first point. And if you can make the case for the key values that build civilization that were taught by Jesus Christ, that were also taught by someone else, whether it be Muhammad or whether it be something out of the Torah, that's good. That's fine. I'm okay getting along with people, and ecumenical relationships. I'm okay with that. And so, but the fact of the matter is, there are certain key Christian doctrines that are not exclusive to Christianity, that are building Western civilization. And once you start figuring out which ones though that is, and I'm not an expert on this, and I haven't laid this out and figured it out necessarily, but we could point to a couple things, and like repentance and forgiveness is really huge because it has to do with mercy and justice and judicial systems and how
Right.
you actually overcome trust barriers. But like, there's a couple key things in there that are doctrinal things that start building civil. And you go, oh, wait a minute, maybe Jesus was right about
Yes.
everything.
Okay. So this is actually really helpful to me because I was having like a little bit of an existential crisis, especially as somebody who's not like, a theological scholar. I was
Hmm.
like, so I guess we're just like screwed then? Like all of civilization is screwed
Well,
because
that's the fall. That's the
well, I
fall
mean,
of
and
Adam and
that's
Eve.
another thing. I mean, going back to
Man
the
is
garden.
fallen.
Yeah, yeah,
Yep.
right. But
It's like, we're screwed. Yep.
there is
Nietzsche
a
figured it out.
solution. There's a path here, and like
Hmm.
it's following natural law. That's
It's.
being virtuous. It's all been
Hmm.
laid out. And
Yep.
so your argument then is when civilization, this is, how you're thinking, at least in an academic sense, when civilization turns away from those core virtues, Western civilization actually does break down. And it's when the virtues are followed and that we have like a shared understanding of moral behavior and
Hmm.
natural limits, that Western civilization flourishes and
Right.
advances.
Yep.
Okay.
So one of the things that to go along with that, so one of the interesting things though is that you don't have to be religious to have civilization. The problem is you have to have it to build it.
Mm,
You can think of religion as the engine, and this is we'll get to modern philosophy and the teapot, this part of Twitter, like our
yeah.
circle of the internet. David Chapman and his piece on mobs is really huge. Um, we'll probably wrap up to the end point of where I think the problem is with some of the really influential stuff in our circles, but it has to do with the fact that you don't need religion, but it is the engine. Essentially, it's the thing you can put on the rocket to get it moving, and then you turn it off. You can go an entire lifetime. You can go 80 years, but eventually, somewhere along the line, people are just like, "Why are we doing this stupid stuff?" And they stop doing it, and just everything just falls
Right.
apart. And we've
Yeah.
seen that. We have seen that in the past 20 years.
Yeah. And
We've
I've seen, I
seen
mean, like,
truth become what? Fake
yes.
news, and everything
So
just fell
let's
apart.
talk about a little bit more about like, I guess now sort of like the state we're in right now and how
Sure.
everybody's sort of confused. And then I'd like to hear, because there's another trajectory that's worth talking about once we talk about, how things are broken, the doom, and then we'll go to the optimism. This is how we go on this show. But um because I've seen people go on these trajectories where they will try to find some kind of mooring and they will become a Buddhist and a meditator and a Taoist and now a Zizian, or like everyone's just trying to find grasping at, and then they eventually just come back to this. And so there's this like sort of friendliness to Christianity. I want to come back to that. But first, let's talk a little bit more about how and why things are broken in this like postmodern, in the wake of the
Sure.
postmodern
So
wave.
the wake of so what happened is, okay, so there's a couple things that were all happening at once. I will point back to I always like to point back to before, because when you point back to before, you're like, oh wait, people have known this for thousands of years. You're like, yep. And it's just like there's only one truth, that which is I believe this is the way I worded it in my very first opening Substack piece. It was an intro. It was, that which is true has always been true and always will be true. And a mathematician or physicist should be able to understand this pretty readily.
Yeah.
That which is true has always been true and always will be
Well,
true.
that's
And
natural law, at least
when
the
you
way I'm.
bring that into but when you bring it into like religion and other things, it starts people getting like what, and you start talking about egregores, and people go like, well, actually, and I one of my things is usually like if you go back to Jung, he actually starts talking about some stuff. There's an interesting paraphrase from Jordan Peterson. But if I'm really a hot take mood, I'll go like, well, let's turn to Paul. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against powers, and start talking about like, oh look, oh look, not only are you onto something with the egregore thing, we all can see you're onto something.
It's already the
100
set.
AD.
Yeah,
Like
right.
it goes back
This is
to
when we're now.
Adam.
I
It
know.
goes all problems are solved. You just
Right.
have to get the framing right, and you just have to find out what our ancestors, what the ancients were scribbling on the cave walls. They knew the answers, that to the extent they figured them out. It's all, there's nothing new. There's nothing new. People are like, well, technology. No, there's nothing new. But like, so that's kind of the white pill. But a lot of the conflict is trying to figure out who was right all along. And
Yes.
so the people who are heavily read in our circles are heavily read because they're trying to figure out who was right. But I can point to natural. We just talking about natural law. The way of nature is what Marcus Aurelius talked about in Meditations. It's
Yeah.
just like he was saying the same thing, and like Socrates was counseling with his inner daemon and or demon or spirit or Holy Spirit or Holy Ghost when he was trying to make certain decisions. It's just like this is just it's the same thing. It's always been the same thing. It will never change.
Yeah.
But so to get back to what we're talking about with postmodernism, that just has to be an underlying framework. The postmodern takeover of institutions continued partly because of the introduction of modern technology, specifically TV, in the post-war depression. We talked a little bit about derangement syndrome and so forth. So with the post, because a lot of 1945, the baby boomer generation were raised on stories of what happened during World War II, and the problem is hearing on the grandpa's lap what happened in the Great Wars, that it kind of made that their foundation myth. Once you understand that the battles of World War II, and that like Hitler is actually a substitute for like Satan and the devil, like once you
Yeah.
understand that is your foundation myth, you start to see everything we deal with in modern politics with derangement syndrome and everybody mad about whatever.
So yeah, please go
It's
go on your
as if
derangement. Yeah.
nothing happened. It's as if nothing happened before 1945. It's
Right.
as if it's as if that was the book of Genesis. World War
Right.
II, go to into a Barnes and Noble. World War II was the book of Genesis. Half the time they forget World War One, which is crazy. But like
Right.
nothing happened before 1945, apparently. Like that was the book of Genesis. We had the Holocaust, we had all these terrible things, and everything has to be compared to those. There's no
Everything
Pharaoh,
is
there's no
Hitler.
Moses, there's
Everyone's a
no
Nazi who's a bad. Yeah.
yeah, there's
Right.
no I've got a lot of artwork of Dimmitt. I've got for a point of example, this is the world that I live in. I've my from a thrift store, my wife got the complete works of the translated notes of Da Vinci that I've been going through. This is before World War II, mind you. I'm one to learn things about the world that happened before 1945. This is some of the most important stuff that has ever been like translated, ever been recorded.
Yep.
Trying to or go through his funny left-handed backwards writing, and it's really interesting. He solves a lot of stuff that Isaac Newton also solved um, on his own. A very very smart individual, Da Vinci.
So
He's an incredible.
tie this theory of the so World War II is the book of Genesis. Hitler is the devil. Nazis are
Derangement
people. So
syndrome.
then tie that in with how
Okay,
you think about
so
derangement
okay,
syndrome.
so basic 101 slash pop slash introductory college psychology. Your body is composed of two hemispheres in the brain. This gets into I talk a lot about Taoism and men versus women, and there's a reason for this. There's this opposition. Everything's got like a backside to it. Your nervous system, we have the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. For those who are not educated in psychology, let me give a quick high school rundown of this. So the sympathetic nervous system is your fight or flight. When your sympathetic nervous system is turned on, it shuts other things off. It shuts all kind. It will increase your heart rate. It is to keep you from dying. Your sympathetic is despite the name is a little bit misleading, but the idea is it's in touch. It's feeling what you're feeling. It is in touch and is ready to react. It's ready to attack. It's ready to get them, or it's ready to turn and run and get out of there.
Hmm.
But we are constantly in that state. The other one, the parasympathetic, will activate a lot of your regular calm down digestion. It'll turn on systems and let your body kind of run and process. A lot of health issues. Honestly, people gaining weight in our culture, we haven't really looked into this, but there does seem to be some indication that fertility issues and stress and anxiety issues do seem to have a correlation with people's online experience and their social media and their politics and so forth.
Wow.
Because
Okay. So
when you
just
turn that sympathetic nervous system on, even for those of us who manage it well, I mean, I'm losing my hair. Those of us who manage it well, it severely impacts a lot of these internal organs and systems because you're switching that on. And
and you're just kind of like it's stressing your system out.
yeah, like
Okay.
your system is always running. The thing is, you have essentially your good times, bad times internal system that your body has involved
Yeah.
to run. And if you only run the bad time software, you will find that what it's doing is it's essentially spinning cells faster. You'll be more high risk for cancer. You'll be having all these other health problems. People who have issues with their bones or back problems or early arthritis and some of the other things. Like, we don't fully understand the relationship, but essentially you're running on all cylinders. You're
Yeah,
running,
that makes
if
sense.
everywhere you drove your car, you went as fast as that car could go, about 120 miles an hour or so in
The
that
car
minivan,
would break
everywhere
down.
you
Yeah.
go,
Right.
it won't last.
Yeah.
It's not gonna last.
Right.
And the Brian Johnson and the Don't Die movement, they're an interesting group.
Oh my
But
god. We can
his
get into
whole
them
you
as a
need
weird cult,
his
but
we
yeah,
don't
go.
I'd rather not, for I have too much bias in that regard. I'll say some things I'll regret. But the point being is he's right about this whole sleep problem, because
Ugh.
like sleep is huge. People are not getting enough sleep. I'm not getting enough sleep, but I also have a newborn, so I have a little bit of an excuse right now,
Yeah, that is.
but that's
Derangement
the
syndrome.
thing.
Yeah.
That's derangement syndrome. It's caused by all of these things, and it causes those things in turn. It makes you more subject to having health issues, and health issues also put strain on your body.
Mhm.
If you live in constant pain, you think your mental state's in a good place. No, and so it cuts both ways. But so derangement syndrome. So all of this is derangement syndrome. But derangement syndrome in the political space, when we say Trump derangement syndrome, or one of the things one of the quotes I did pull in for my latest Substack piece on entitled "You Have Derangement Syndrome, and I Love You," is about, or the quote is from when Trump was being elected in 2015, 2016 during the election, and
Yeah.
they said, "This is I think they were center left people. I think it was at CBS, where they said, "This is really bad for really bad for the country, but like it's damn good ratings for for CBS." And so it's just like that is it. That once you start realizing, they're just like, man, this is going to hurt people. We're going to make some money.
Yeah.
And once you understand that media, um, we don't have to talk about CIA, like MK Ultra experiments and Ted Kaczynski. We don't have to go down the road of like, oh, they're trying to psyop the people
Conspiracy
into,
or
like
yeah.
they did. Honestly, that knowledge that you can actually put people into a state where they're hair trigger and willing to react and make a stupid decision has been understood since that time period. You can argue over what they were doing at that time, but particularly, and I had tip to like Glenn Beck back in the day when he was commenting on like the Obama administration. They brought in a lot of psychologists. There was a lot of increase in psychological understanding and marketing and sales and how we process stuff
Ugh.
post Bush, post like the hate Bush movement. A lot of the unelected bureaucracy in the United States started to understand this better, and
Really?
essentially being able to put so look at both parties a lot more suspiciously as of post 9/11. But so post 9/11 or so, you just start to see both sides and start realizing that there's a lot more psychology to politics now, and they are essentially, the more they can keep you in this state of like, oh, look at this bad news story. It's just, it doesn't matter what it's about. Um, some kid got blown up in Syria. Some teenage girl got, if I use the R word, in Chicago, or like
Yeah.
somebody shot somebody. Oh, this kid got beat up on a school bus and it was so terrible. Here's a TikTok video. Everybody go watch it. What's the purpose in all this? It
Right.
doesn't affect you. This is the why. Like, how could you believe in God if there's some bad thing happening somewhere elsewhere in the world? I'm sure we can find it at any given time.
Yeah.
And so we
And
are,
yeah.
yeah.
I would just say, like, from my own experience, I've had a really weird relation to this whole derangement syndrome thing, partially because I left the US like the day Trump was not the day, but like between when Trump was elected the first time and went into office. And so I was just out of this whole like scene of the way that the media was playing out in that period.
You
And
weren't being kicked in the head on a daily basis.
no, and I was just not watching any of this stuff, and so then,
Good for you.
Matt Taibbi's book, Hate Inc. came out, and it's basically like, we're making money off of selling this hate of the other side,
Mhm.
and that it's not a conspiracy theory, it just
It gets
is the
people to
way
vote.
it's just the way the media runs now, and now that I'm back in the US, I'm like, I can't even wrap my head around why Zelensky is like some kind of figure, some kind of like deified figure for certain people, and I guess it's part of
We
this
missed
meta
something. Yeah.
narrative that they're kind of like hijacked this World War II Genesis story, and now now it's playing out as like good and evil. But I'm like, I really can't wrap my head around like why am I deifying some other country's president? Like,
'Cause
why
he's
don't
fighting the bad guys.
well, yeah,
He's
exactly.
he's
And so
gonna
I'm like,
save us from Satan, and it's just
and
like,
so it doesn't
that
matter like what people are asked to put their attention toward, like they'll just kind of there a lot of people are just hooked on
you
this
start
derangement.
seeing what I said about, like, what I said about the whole, like, Hitler Satan thing. You can see that they're trying to say, well, the new actually Satan's Vladimir Putin. Like, he's the
Yes.
actual in your foundation myth, in your Genesis. Now you have to go and swap that out. It's World War II, but it's also like the Cold War. So now they're trying to do like, well, the Cold War. Actually, the Cold War is really your Genesis story now. Like there's kind of some
Yes.
conflict there between like, well, what about Israel? So if you put somebody in the corner, it's just like, well, Ukraine versus Israel. And it's just like, I hate to break
Sure.
people. There's a lot of people who are Jewish in both
Yeah, well,
places. So like, who do you
Palestine
want
is
to
the same
support?
too. I'm like, I don't have a dog in this fight. I don't know why I'm supposed to. I mean, I know it's I
You
want there
have
to be peace, but I just like
you
I'm
have
not
the
going to
wisdom
I'm not gonna
to
have a
yeah.
proxy like war about some other country's war here against other people who are my fellow citizens. I don't understand that.
You're seeing you have the wisdom to see that you actually do not have a dog in the fight. And the problem is sometimes people have family members or they know somebody who knows somebody, and that's the danger of social media, because with this technology now. Your sympathetic nervous system, your ability to not get eaten by to try to not get eaten by a wildcat or a tiger or lion in the jungle, is now able to see every lion and every tiger at once, all over the world. Everything that could possibly eat you, we can put it all in front of you. And guess who's guess who was evolved to deal with that? Nobody. There's not a living organism. There's not a single-celled amoeba. Nothing is ready to be surrounded by or feel like it is surrounded by every possible threat, every instance of every possible threat, not just
Right,
every threat, but
right.
like everything could come and get you. They're coming for your guns. They're coming to get you. They're
Yeah.
going to arrest you. They're going to
And then
cancel you. They're
I
gonna
know.
take your job. They're gonna like
I know.
how do you fight
And
it?
I actually had I did have my brain broken by this to some extent before I left the US in the sense of like just studying high level sociology and just being like, whoa, things are way worse than a lot of people know. They're really messed up in the school system. Like, these systems are kind of like going off a cliff. And so I kind of got freaked out about it. But now I've sort of come around to looking at like
That's the
actual
right wing media hole
well,
is
and
like
actually
we're
right like
doomed.
but if you
There's
look at like
both. There's the left wing
yeah,
one and there's the right wing one.
yes, but like
Yep.
the when you look at the actual like okay for statistics of violent crime or something or health or anything like it's
Mm-hmm.
so much better now than it's like ever been in human history. It's just so out of proportion our fear with
Mm-hmm.
regard to a lot of these things that how we think like we're constantly under attack. Separate question for you or actually comment and then a question. um First one is John Robb. He's a theorist we've had on this podcast before. He calls this the swarm, and what's worrisome about the swarm is like it has no borders, and there's just like this global social media derangement swarm that like actually determines politics to some extent, which is a little scary. But I'm wondering whether you think my question is whether you think you already kind of said this, but like recreating these myths, these like these foundational
Mm-hmm.
myths and mapping them onto these like modern things. Is it just a result of this like sort of postmodern breaking that we're not just looking to the original myths, but we're trying to remap them on these modern things?
I think every generation has their myths and you have to pick yours.
Okay.
And some people want to create their own myths. And some people believe that they have the old myths. They're like, no, mine's the real one. It's just like let's speak to native people or like native Hawaiians, and you hear these ancient foundation myths that these cultures have. And so like people will push their various foundation myths. But I think the important thing is you have one, whether you like it or not, whether
Yeah.
you're atheist, doesn't matter. You have a foundation myth. What
Yeah.
is it? Find out what it is. Should that be your foundation myth? And so
And
that's what you have to
is a
figure
is a
out.
is a media corporation making money off of you having this foundation myth
The
and
Marvel
keeping you
Cinematic Universe.
yeah, right, and yeah, right, exactly. I have a friend who's been on this podcast a few times, Chris Mott, and he literally talks about he's an international like diplomacy Institute for Peace and Diplomacy think tank, and he's just like a lot of this stuff is literally like Marvel, Harry Potter mapped onto like the way people think about geopolitics.
When you start seeing people calling people in geopolitics Voldemort, you'll suddenly realize exactly what I'm talking about because somebody missed the World War II boat and decided to skip to their childhood literature.
Oh my God. Okay, so
It's
now, so
funny because it's true. It's
I
funny because it's
know,
all simple.
and it's
Everything starts
and
clicking together.
absurd. I
The
know.
world is not a complicated place. The
No,
world is a bunch
right.
of people looking at it from a there's the problem is the world is too many different sets of binoculars to look through. Once you
That's right.
realize, oh, it's one thing. Oh, it works. Oh, it works
Yeah.
here and there. Good case, bad case. It's just once your
Yeah.
theory works, it's funny because it just everything clicks. And you're like,
Yes.
oh, I get it now. Oh, okay.
Okay, so on that note, let's talk a little bit about the rationalists because I think they're also a subset of people who sort of hubristically thought, we figured it out. We figured out like a utilitarian approach to the universe
They
and
aren't
virtue.
married with children, so they didn't figure it out.
Yeah, well, and
Evolution disagrees.
yeah, well, that's true. That's been my
Not
thought with a lot
to,
of these,
I'm a
people.
jerk in those cases, but it's one of those I didn't fire the first shot type of thing. So
Yeah,
anyway,
right. So
sorry, you're
let's
saying.
talk about what do you think the rationalists are downstream of this sort of postmodern break? Are they just trying to make sense of the world and they're using a certain kind of tool? Like tell me the history,
Okay,
the history
sure.
as you see it of the rationalists.
Okay, sure. So the chapter 2 of the history is after the postmodernists took over the institutions. You had I hate to say godless, but you had a post-religion movement in academia. The communists and Marxists were decidedly against it, partly because when you had a religious bent, you were not fundamentally loyal to the collective and or under a
Mm,
fascist regime, the state. Essentially, what happens is the thing becomes the second most important thing, which is not appreciated, and we're going to have to drag some Christians into the Colosseum and feed them to the lions because we can't be having that. And so you've seen that in the Cold War and a lot of in a lot of various places in the 20th century, from the 1940s to the 1960s, 70s, 80s, in China, North Korea, where even in Japan, there's some brutal stuff that's been done to Christians. But religious people in general, people who are committed and actually religious, fare pretty poorly under these postmodern restraints
Wait, can I just
because
pause you there
sure,
for
go
just a
ahead.
second? This is a really important insight and one I never really thought about before. But the way I think about, let's just say the industrial, like, post-industrial revolution society is that there was a scaling up of like sort of loyalties and allegiances from like a town or a religion or a culture or like a place, a valley, a river valley to a nation state or your job maybe eventually like loyalty to the corporation or whatever.
Mhm.
So it was a period of sort of trying to break those smaller, more humanely scaled allegiances
Mhm.
to be able to force
Yes.
people into these larger allegiances. Okay, that's actually a really
Yes.
important
So,
insight and one I
okay.
never thought
So,
about.
well, one of the well, hey, let me try to extend it a little bit, which is with um everybody has like motivations, and you've kind of like pushed me, and I'm going to have to mention. I was going to set a certain thought aside, one of my many little tirades, but I think it's relevant, and you've kind of brought it up with that. So, what is their motive? Your motive is to solve problems. You're in politics. We're trying to make our nation successful. We're trying to make our community successful. We are suffering in a 1960s, 50s Russian Cold War economy. Like, we are suffering. We need to make the suffering stop. What do we do? Well, we have these people who are not committed to the cause. Maybe they're the problem. Maybe the issue is they are not participating in our experiment, and that's why our experiment is failing. This is communism will fail anywhere. There was some communist intellectual was saying it'll fail anywhere there's capitalism because the neighbors are not playing nice in the trade wars. And it's just like it's not been tried until we take over the whole world. Until the last person has been turned, it's not real. And you can bring this up into gender politics and get in a lot of trouble if you would like. But the so anyway, to get to the point that to mention the thing I wasn't going to, I have this little bit I do about worship. Everybody worships something. This is talking about how everybody has their value framework of the religion, but what you worship is the most important thing. What is it you spend the most time around? What is it you think about the most? What is it you? This is kind of like the who are your five closest friends that'll tell you a lot about who you are. But like, what is the thing that you hold up the highest, that you obsess over, that you think about? That is what you worship, and it's not what you say you worship. And this is actually when I generally fire shots in the religious direction because I've seen an empty church during a Super Bowl and I've been like, Lord, like, is this when you're coming? Is like on a Super Bowl? Like, is the apocalypse going to happen during a Super Bowl? It's just like, oh, Jesus is here. Where are you? Oh, you should have been at church when you were at the Super Bowl. Like, well, looks like we found out who the good guys are. So
Yeah.
like, that's the, but like the thing is, what people say they worship and what they actually worship are seldom the same thing. And once you realize that, you can start going, oh, what do I spend a lot of time focusing on? There's a lot of people who are family-centered religious people who really only care about money. They really, at the end of the day,
Right.
they will sell their children for money. There are people who, at the end of the day, there's one thing that drives and orients people, and that is for the truly religious people. It is an aspect of their religion, whether it's the Bible, whether it's a certain doctrine that Jesus taught, whether it's you see a lot of this in the pro-life movement. There are people who are more pro-life than they are Christian, who are very Christian, but they're also, at the
Just
end of the
so
day,
tied up their identity with
they're
the
so
pro-life.
tied up in it. It's
Yeah.
that derangement syndrome thing. You got to fight
Yeah.
the threat. The threat is more important than all other things. You must fight the threat.
That's helpful too, because I think a lot of people will say, oh, well, look at religion. You've got all these fake religious people. You got all these people who like use religion as a cudgel to attack other people and aren't actually acting virtuously at all. And so that's helpful in both directions. Like,
Hmm.
what are people saying their values are, and what do they show their values are by how they act and what
Right.
they're actually focusing on. So, okay, now let's
So
go back
this,
to the
yeah, back
rationalist.
to the rationalists and the timeline. So all the way through to the 1990s, where you had the Satanic Panic, you have these reactionary movements. I have a serious problem with the word reactionary. I consider that to be fundamentally equivalent to derangement and or just respond, just knee jerk. It's the sympathetic nervous system. And so
Right.
there are people who are like, I'm a proud reactionary right way. There are actually little movements and niches that refer to themselves as reactionary, and fundamentally I love them and I want to pick them up and just throw them out of my social media and never see them again, because it's just like, because what good does it do my soul? It doesn't do anything good. But
Yep.
the rationalists
Wait,
are
stick on this reactionary for just a second, because
okay, sure.
are we talking reactionary to
I would say
religion? Or are we
I
doing
wish all of the
reaction
above,
to postmodernism and
all
try
of
to
the
return
above.
back? Okay.
All of the above. All reactions are bad. Pro-actions, being proactive, it's the first habit in the classic book, Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. It talks about the circle of concern versus influence. This is one of those must-reads for somebody who wants to like be one of the successful and influencers. And no one reads it nowadays, but I highly recommend it because a lot of
Really?
buzzwords,
Okay. I
a
thought that was
lot of
kind of a
okay.
meme book.
It was every businessman in the 80s and 90s read it and abused it, and so it's been
Okay.
buzzworded to death. But the problem is, if you can get underneath that, this is a postmodern thing. It's like, well, words mean whatever. And like, get underneath it into the concepts and the whole like sharpen the saw, which means that you need to on a regular basis be improving your habits. Think win-win, which that one you've probably heard a lot of. Synergy, like you've heard this as buzzwords that have become
I
garbage in
see.
the
Yeah,
90s and
yeah.
2000s, but like they were reading this book and just torturing it for their own ends, but like
I
the
see.
actual
Okay.
principles are solid. The principles are solid,
Okay.
but
So
the
reaction you don't like. You like
reaction
people.
is the
It's like
circle of concern.
people who are anti-woke, but then what are they for?
Yeah, exactly,
Okay.
exactly. They're not
Okay.
doing anything good. They're just
Okay.
reacting. It's just
Okay.
like they're consuming. They're becoming more
No, I agree
deranged.
with you.
But
Yeah.
like it's important. We have to be vigilant and be as deranged as possible. We have to be paying attention.
But they
We have to
have
be
no
reading every
vision.
bad news article.
Yeah,
Just like,
okay.
okay, and what does this do for you and your friends and your community
Like
and your
or
civilization?
whatever. All you're
I
doing is
don't know, but I can't turn off Fox News because I might miss the next bad story. And
hey,
so,
okay. So
yeah,
all right,
it's
I'm on board with you on that.
yeah.
So okay, now let's hear about more about the rationalists. Sorry, I
Okay,
keep interrupting you.
no, you're fine. The rational there's kind of several threads going along here. There's different angles to look at this, and there are more than one correct angle to look at it from. So that's just bear that in mind because that's the flow of the psychology, as it were. But specifically in the history, you have the rationalists, which were trying to deal with essentially the nonsense. These are people who are not religious. They consider themselves people of the Enlightenment. They look to a lot of the 1700s, 1800s ideas. They read, oh gosh, I'm going to butcher this. Off the top of my head, let's see. There's Locke. There's Paine. A lot of people that the founding fathers read. There's that was where a lot of the American rationalism was anyway. But there's Rousseau. There's a lot of like psychologists study. Um, I actually don't. I couldn't name the. I've read some of the rationalist literature.
Is
I
it
know a lot of
Mill's?
them.
Is Mill?
Mills.
Oh,
Mills is
Mill
one
is,
of
or
them.
Mill is the guy who does utilitarianism.
Utilitarianism is one of the movements. There's various materialism. A lot of great Mises Institute books on some of the stuff. There's like Austrian School of Economics. There's a lot of interesting bits in the rationalist group that are just they see things. But fundamentally, I come from a computer science standpoint where I kind of just looked at them all and be like, formal propositional logic and understand like and or logic gates in computer hardware and how those are built on transistors up to logic. I almost minored in math, and one of the interesting things is in mathematical proofs they're actually really difficult. And one of the big mistakes that modern people make is, or modern education makes rather, is that they don't teach logic and formal proofs because it's actually astonishing after you start learning how to prove things what cannot be proven. And like rigorous proofs are really hard to do. And I guess my big criticism of a lot of the rationalists is they are like, well, logically I could prove, blah, 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 therefore God does not exist. And you can't prove a negative. Like, what? It's just like you sit here like, well, I've memorized this list of fallacies, and you're using ad hominem. It's just like, okay, this is cute, but like since like ancient philosophy, we had like modus tollens and like all these other ways to describe and nor not and how they all relate to each other and like basic set theory in math,
Yep.
and like none of that's getting used. That's my problem is in computer science, once you understand all of those things, and like De Morgan's laws and how you flip, which essentially when you flip and, like the opposite of and means is not or, when you put a negative sign in front of it. And so understanding that concept in hardware and computer science, it's I had a philosophy class in college and a electric engineering class and a computer discrete math, I believe it was. And like we had a symbol for and or. It was like plus and times, and then you had like the for all and for some the upside down a that means like for all. And so I'm using like 3 or 4 different notations for the same concept. And after a while, you're just like, why am I learning this 4 times, first of all? But the but once you start understanding logic, then you go over to the rationalist movement where people are saying, well, using logic, and it's just like, okay, it's just like logic. And
Yeah,
so
well, I mean, I
the
think it's almost like, well, at least the way I've encountered it, the version of it I've encountered are the spreadsheet brains about agriculture and like food
Mhm.
production systems. And basically, like, I remember having an argument with a vegan on Twitter who was saying like,
I'm
you
sorry.
need to argue this with formal philosophical, logical, uh like equations or whatever. Otherwise, it's not, you're not really arguing, but it's almost like this midwit version of understanding how the world works. And they like
Mhm.
only kind of partially understand the logic and
And they treat it. They
they
have
try to
faith in
like,
it.
they try to like bigwig other people in being like, you're just such an idiot. You don't understand logic, but they're like inaccurately applying it to the point that you can say like, well, you're just not accurately applying this right now, and then they
Right.
will, they'll just double down or whatever.
So there's two points to that. One is that well, I'll give the second one first, which is back in the 2000s we had a very solid understanding in the whole Al Gore drama with climate. There was a very solid understanding that correlation does not equal causation. What that means in a mathematical, like statistical way, was very well understood, and that fell apart really quickly. And nowadays people who are rational conflate
Yes,
that stuff all the two. They do
totally.
correlation nonsense. But like to go to the first point, the thing with a lot of logic is it's very delicate and very subject to which premises you select. The problem is
Yeah,
what people don't realize is premise conclusion might be solid, but that assumes that your premises are correct, and it assumes
correct.
that you chose the right premises amongst all premises. And people can't do basic logic. Let me give you a very simple classical mind your p's and q's, which is actually talking about this in 1800s education. But the let me give you a good example. So this is one of those old coffee book heading ways of putting it. If it rains, then the grass is wet. If it if the grass is wet, does that mean it rained? No, because you can go get a hose and make the grass wet without it raining. It doesn't go backwards. It only
Right.
goes one way. If A, then B doesn't B does not imply A. And this is very simple. This is very simple logic. But like people can't do this, or they're not doing it, or they haven't been trained to do it. Education systems now are not great. We're having these conversations in an environment, in a modern environment, where that's not being done anymore. That people
And
are not looking at that, and they're not going, wait a minute, like you could just pick new premises and you could have a totally different thing. And so
yes,
this is why everything's wrong, and all the rationalists have ended up off base with logic, is
yeah, wait,
because, and this is where religion comes in, because underneath, what's underneath the logic, and they're just like, well, nothing. Our brains are machines, they're computers, and we're going to do Neuralink, and we're going to like wire it up to computer, because we're all just made of ones and zeros. And then there's the whole meme that you get posted about, like they invent the wheel, and Buddhists are like, oh, the world is a wheel, and then like, oh, we invented the printing press. It's just like there's that chain all the way to like, oh, we invented computers. Oh, our brains are computers. The world's a machine. It's just like we have
yes,
this weird idea that everything is that last thing, and
yes,
it's just,
right.
look, I hate to break it to you, but there's something underneath there that we haven't really. And anyway,
So, okay,
so
real briefly, and then we can move on
yeah.
to the post-rationalist. But it's so funny you brought up the rain example, because my favorite example is in in animal agriculture, when people are talking about, there's this statistic that's gets used as a premise that then has all sorts of logical conclusions if you follow this premise. But the premise
Mhm.
is a cow uses X amount of gallons of water to raise, but when they were coming up with that statistic, they were counting all the rainfall that falls on the land that the cow stands on, which of course is not the cow using the water. Not to mention that if the cow drinks
That's
water, it
crazy.
pees it out, a big portion of it, in
Right,
nutrient
and
dense,
that still makes
which
it
is
into the
actually
water
good
table.
for the ecology, especially if it's got
The
nutrients in
water
it, as
doesn't
long as
just
it's
disappear.
no, and as long as it's not concentrated like in a CAFO. In a CAFO, it's a different thing, because then you have to just deal with too many nutrients in one place. That's the bigger
Mhm.
problem. So anyways, there's that statistic, and then people use that in conjunction with a bunch of other statistics that are created in the same exact way, statistics, quote unquote, with the biggest possible air quotes, as you said. And then they say, therefore we need to make we need to make like substrate lab meat.
That's what they want. They wanted to make the lab meat anyway.
Yeah,
All of this
right.
is
And so
this
then
is
they
the thing.
just,
They had their conclusion. They just had to find the right premises.
yes,
This is how
exactly.
it
And
all
so,
works. This is how it
and
all
I,
gets
I
built.
think part of it, and I'm sympathetic to people, because I didn't really realize any of this about agriculture until I literally went onto my own land and saw good animal agriculture in
You
practice
touched
and bad,
grass. The touching of grass is good. That's
yeah,
what
touch
happened.
grass. Exactly. And so,
Once you
and I
do
was like,
that, you go, oh.
yes. And then I saw, like I said at the beginning, then I understood natural limits. But then I think I'm sympathetic to people, because I think part of it is that because, like I said, in the Industrial Revolution, we outscaled our ability to understand at like a human scale what was going
Mhm.
on in the watershed, what's going on in our town, what's going on in our own like church,
Don't be a
versus
monster and kill animals. Just buy your meat from the store.
yeah, what's happening across, yeah, what's
Yeah.
happening across the world, what's happening in Brazil, in the Amazon. And now all of a sudden you've got this like parasympathetic stress response. I can't kill animals. I don't want to kill ecosystems. I love the Amazon. Amazon sounds great. And then you've got all this, weird quote unquote rational response to this information, but the information is so polluted, it's not logical at all.
Yes. Yes. And so you have to get underneath the information, but you have to have a framework for doing that. And like good religions can do that. But if you're rational or logical, you're just like, yeah, but that's nonsense. You're just like, yeah, but I hate to break it to you. None of your models or
What
none
you're
of your
saying is
climate models are
nonsense.
working.
Yeah, what you're saying is nonsense. What I
It's
mean,
just like,
George
well,
Monbiot is this
right.
guy who's like got a huge audience, because all he does is activate people's nervous system and get them stressed out about the environment. And he's literally
Mhm.
crying on TV constantly. He himself is probably very stressed out because of the
Sometimes it's
state of
sincere.
things.
It's not all, because a lot of the right wing reactionaries will go like, well, it's grift and they're lying. It's all fake. And it's just
I
like
think he's
these sometimes
really
they
believes
believe
what
it.
he
They
thinks.
believe
Yeah.
it.
And
If
then
you're really tortured
he's like,
enough, you'll do the
his
work.
life is he's all he's doing is crying all the time, and then leading people toward this like very unhealthy lifestyle. So anyways, it's just one of those things where, yeah, you can reject this other way of thinking all you want, to your peril. Okay, so now let's talk about teapot, because I love the teapot people. And
Yeah.
then yeah.
Let me connect the the 60s history to teapot.
Okay. Okay.
So the next section is, so uh I'm gonna say the thing, Gamergate. Okay, so let me back up before that, though.
Yeah.
So, one of the things that in the art movement being taken over by this total dominance of postmodern narratives, and I do want to make I do want to point back to when you're talking about statistics. One of the things in a lot of the new reactionary, resistant. I've jokingly called them revolutionary right. People who are trying to change things right now quietly on the right. Is this democracy is a false god, and there's a problem with that because people hold it up as the ideal form of truth. This is very closely. I want to tie that in the postmodern narrative because what it is this the idea that well the truth is somewhere in the middle. It's this centrist decision that the statistical middle of the bell curve is where you will find all the truth. That's not the case. That is not the case. If that were the case, everybody would be happy and successful, have a big family. Like if the average person was perfect in the way that Jesus asked us to be, then sure, you can use the middle of the bear curve. That's not the case. We don't live in that world. And so the middle, the statistical middle, whatever gets the most votes, is not necessarily true. And that is obvious to most people, but that is how most people think. They go, well, statistically, and it's just like, okay. So that means the odds might be against me, but okay. And so that's the thing. And so you end up in a declining worth rate. But do note that postmodernism and democracy and statistics are all the same thing. And so when you get into like peer review and the replication crisis, it's because we said, well, statistically, and we took the middle of the bell curve as true, and then we built on that, and we built on that, and we built on that. So it's just like, let's vote. Okay, that's true. Let's vote. Okay, that's true. Oh, let's vote. Okay, that's true. And that's how you end up where we got in academia. People who have doctorates fall for this. My joke in academia, because I almost went into grad school for some of this stuff and chose not to, is that to put it in Dungeons and Dragons terms, or a tabletop, that int isn't whiz, that intelligence is not wisdom. They are essentially perpendicular to each other. And there are some people who I have known who are not particularly intelligent, who I'd say are probably barely scraping 90 IQ, maybe lower, who are making better life choices than me, who are happier, they're more successful. And
Yeah.
I want to be like them. And
Yeah.
I made some of these decisions in my late teens or 20s, being somebody who was at least one standard deviation above the mean. And I know we're not talking about IQ, but we're not going to go there. But I essentially decided, you know what, IQ is stupid and dangerous. I'm going to focus on adding points to my wisdom as I level up as I
I
get
love
older.
that.
And
Yeah.
so, but that's relevant to this. So now, as we get into the modern era, we go through the satanic panic in the 90s. There was the economic crises of the 70s and 80s. So as we're going through this postmodern movement, postmodernism has taken it for granted for some time that it essentially won. And when you had things like in the 90s, they were pulling the Ten Commandments and other things out of judicial houses and so forth, like the Freedom from Religion Foundation. Postmodernism, atheism, rationalism, this movement, this idea, this concept won and took over, and we've seen it up until the post rats and stuff we've seen in the past couple of years. So the shot heard round the world was for Gamergate was set up by the 90s and 2000s video games, because are video games art? What would you say? Are video games art?
No, I don't know. I don't want to get into this
What
because
is your
I've got
no? Just this is relevant. This is actually going to tie into how we got here now. But just if flip a coin, like yes or no, would you say they are art? Because this is the postmodern question. Don't feel bad if we disagree, but
um no.
you would say they're no. I think most people said no, and the reason why most people said no is because they are not what we traditionally associate with the arts. Even though if you look into like video game like media, some of it is beautiful and gorgeous, and some of the music tracks and playlists are some of the greatest stuff. Koji Kondo and like some of the stuff that Nintendo's produced are classics that last our time. So there's definitely an art component to it,
Well,
and
it's like the question though is to me, and this is something I have a conversation with one of my friends. His name
sure,
is Neil Clark on
uh-huh.
Twitter, and he's always like basically like everything modern is just it like can't be art anymore. We're like too postmodern
Right.
to make
We're
anything
exactly,
real.
exactly.
Okay.
Everything is too postmodern. The foundation, the problem is it art? Well, you can't judge. I mentioned this earlier. Is it art? In the 1950s and 60s, like if I take the banana to the wall, who are you to say that isn't art?
Right.
I would make the case. This is like my strong case, and I'll write about this eventually because I wrote something years ago and I need to get it onto my Substack. The problem is you should be able to say, should I use profanity? Yes, it is art and it's bad art.
Yeah,
You need to
okay.
be able to say, you need to be able to say, like, sure, Piss Christ is art. It's also objectively bad, like the Dadaist, like toilet.
This is
Sure,
actually a
it's
white
art, but
pill
it's
too, because
bad art.
yes, because I think
And
part of
so,
what I struggle with is
huh,
anything in the postmodern era,
correct,
no matter
because
what you try to do
that
to
is the
say you're
postmodern.
marking,
Yes,
and so it is
it's
actually a
all
white
social
pill to
construction.
say art does
Yes,
exist. There's just we
it
can
is
start to
objectively
reclaim
right.
good versus bad. There
Hmm.
is an objective good versus bad
Well,
assessment of these things.
yes, there
Okay,
is an objective good
that's
and
a
evil. That
helpful,
is that
yeah.
that is the foundation we had that we lost to postmodernism. Postmodernism took over; it won. So we live in that world. And I've had people I disagree with in Teapot who are very intelligent who say, well, "Look, it's just a tool." It's just like, see, here's the problem. That is the postmodern view of postmodernism.
Yes,
It's just like
yes.
you are in this boat, and you're telling me how the boat is. It's just like, well, yes, to you that is just that. It's just like I think there's a
But
fundamental
you're just
evil
being
going on.
more postmodern than anyone.
Right. It's just
Okay,
right. It's just well, I think they're some of the wisest people I know, but I think it's a place where there still might be slipping up a little bit because it's just like,
got
look,
it.
you're not willing to entertain an objective truth on which you're building. You're still seeing things from a well, it's all this narrative versus this narrative, these people versus
Got
these
it.
people, this idea versus
Yes.
this idea. It's always conflict. This is the good versus evil. This is one of the ways of defining good versus evil. I have another one I usually prefer, but it's whether things are unified or whether they're in conflict with each other, whether it's
Mm.
war versus peace. And so it's this idea that everything should always be at war that was like the opening statement I'm going to butcher the wording, but that Marx introduced, where the history of man has all been a matter of class warfare. It's just like everything is war. Everything is war is the foundation of, I would say, evil and postmodernism, which is like there is no fundamental bottom for the universe. There's only everybody's individual version of the bottom, and they're all in conflict all the time.
Ugh, I
And
love
so,
this.
yeah, but now that you piece that together, if we go
Yeah.
back to Gamergate, why did the gamers lose the ethics in gaming journalism when they found out that all of the journalists are like sleeping with each other, they all have these secret chats, and they all dropped a bunch of articles in parallel and don't actually care about the games, and they're rigging the reviews? Like, how did the gamers lose that? And the answer is because the question came up, well, are video games art? And they all said, when to me, I think if you go back to an objective framework and you look at it from like a try to put yourself in the mind of an 1800s like romantic era period, there are
Yeah.
performance art where the players are like someone who's trying to learn the music for an orchestra, and the developers are like the conductor or the choreographer for dance. And so when you look at it, oh, video games, not only are they art, you can actually open up the humanities and you have the different fields of art, and you can actually place it underneath the performing arts. And once you do that, you go, oh, and that's why sometimes the dance comes with music, and sometimes they have visuals, and it all starts clicking together, and you start going, oh, that's why, because what happened is gaming came in to the postmodern world that took over art and won and brought in a brand new art that had not been subverted, that had not lost. And what happened is it was a bunch of teenagers and they didn't defend it well. And it turned into a harassment campaign, I believe is what Wikipedia entitles the article, because we have to have that in the title because we work at the New York Times and we won.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so that's what happened. And I mean, if you trace the history back of that, tracing back from that, Gamergate was caused because people all wanted to get into journalism, and they were center left, open minded, very high openness people, which is normal. And they wanted to use journalism. They wanted to get into journalism, but they couldn't get the journalism job after college. And they were trained into that because they were told that was the way to go from academia. Their college professors essentially groomed them into that path. And that traces back into this postmodern narrative and the way that academia has been handled. And so it was already of the philosophies. A lot of these professors were communist or Marxist or whatever, and they cared about social issues. And that's why journalism is important and why you should be a journalist. And that's why we had too many journalists who ended up going into hating video games and doing reviews anyway, to corruption that caused Gamergate. As you rewind into the 2000s and you go backward, you start seeing, oh, so what happened was postmodern like academia is interested in all these social issues because they've been subverted and taken over the art movements and so forth in the 80s and 90s. And does that all click? So now you see click, 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 and that's how we got to that fist fight, and that's why they lost the fist fight. Is it goes back. It's in the same narrative of postmodernism. Is there a foundational thing, or are there just things that are in conflict with each other? That war mindset has been the post-war World War II like academia through the 20th century, and a lot of marketing and sales, and oh, you can just sell anything to anybody. And that marketing and sales mindset is actually why we see a decline post Gamergate drama into modern video games, because they've actually bought the idea that you don't need to make a high quality product. What you need to do is sell it. It actually, what is good anyway? What is good versus bad? It really just has to do with public perception. We can craft that public perception. This is what some of Obama's advisors were having conversations about. Jonathan Gruber considered the stupidity of the average American voter, if you will, with the Affordable Care Act. It's all the same thing, the same through line. And why? So when you ask the question, why are they adding these crummy features? Why is Ubisoft going bankrupt? Why are they bring in these like Sweet Baby Inc. or whatever? And yes, there's this influence post 2008 and 2009 with BlackRock and a lot of the diversity, equity, inclusion money. But there's also this fundamental postmodern belief that we really just need to get control of the narrative. We just got to get control of the narrative, and people will like the game.
Okay, so
There is no objective, good or bad. It's just
let
whether you
me
sell it.
yes, okay, so let me try to recap. So, and then
Sure.
maybe we can, I feel like this logic, this fight is actually everywhere. And
It's one fight.
you're applying
Yeah.
it to the games, but I would, so I'm trying to recap here because
Yeah.
actually like I'm not on the
It's one
inside of a
fight.
lot of the
Sure.
gamer people, but so
I'm not. I guess I don't spend a lot of time there. We'll put it that way. I keep
but
ears in
and
a lot
what
of
I know
places, but yeah,
enough that
it's
you're
not
like,
my
you know,
obsession.
there is, I think that there is not
Uh,
just, let's just say in gamers, but there's a lot of this. There are people who sincerely love something. They love the art of this game. They love it because it's good quality, because it, you know, is something beautiful and true to them in
this is
some way.
David Chapman's piece on mops and people who they're the geeks and the people who are the lovers
Yes,
of the thing.
yes, and so there's some
Uh-huh.
people who sincerely love this, and then there's a whole other group who are more or less postmodern and have some sort of profit motive and have some sort of motive to control people, and they'll
Mhm.
just hijack these various things that people love, and the fight is between those who think everything is relative, there is no truth, there is nothing beautiful or good in any objective sense, and then there's another group of people who think there is something true and good and
And
beautiful.
they're trying to suss out what it is. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're trying to work it out, and there's always just like these fights that crop up between these two people. I would say like the in my world the regen ag people versus the, you know, lab meat people. It's like this is something that's good and true
You're seeing
based
the
on
meta narrative.
natural law,
Yep.
and you are trying to control and say there's no really objective truth or goodness to any of this this ecosystem existing, this manner of, you know, being on the landscape, this
Uh-huh.
manner of being a like a steward to the land. None of that is good. There's just
There's
this
just conflict between
subjective
groups.
reality that I can argue via
Right.
statistics. Okay. So then
Mhm.
help me, because now that you were talking about the gamers, I'm thinking a lot. I don't know if you're in this world at all on Twitter, but I'm thinking a lot about the dissident right. There are a lot of sensitive young men in the dissident right who are trying to seek truth in a
I'm
way
in
that I
those
think is
circles
very
trying to help, but they have to want to be helped.
yeah, I mean, there's like there's a subgroup that I hate that I think are just kind of latching onto this parasympathetic thing and just like saying in group stuff that's like supposedly,
Mhm.
you know, kind of shocking, and they say all this stuff that like nobody cares because everyone's so postmodern. Nobody is even shocked by anything they say anymore. They think they are because they're all 17. But then there's another like group that I've come across. I'm in this a group chat called Nature Pilled, and it's all these young men who just love nature. Like they love animals, they love
If you go
ecosystems.
outside long enough and you go on a hike, you're like, why don't I just live here? This is better. Like, why have I been inside the machine? Like,
And then I think about like
go
the
camping.
teapot, like I don't know, I came across like Brooke and Mycelium Mage and Eigen Robot, and they're kind of like, you know, just they're just seeking truth to some extent and goodness to some extent. So I'm wondering, yeah, do you have a take on these different little like subcultures, sub niches?
I will say I need to mention that I'm biased, that I've kind of become one of Eigenrobot's little simps. He's got a lot of fans, and I'm just because you're mutuals with him doesn't mean anything because he follows a lot of people. I have a lot of respect for him.
I like him too.
I happen to think that him and his wife Bosco, and they've got a second kid now. I happen to think that they're essentially the poster child for people who are in this moving from rationalism to post-rationalism people
Yep.
who have figured it out, but I would argue that they necessarily haven't consciously figured it out, and that's
It's just
why
like
they are
good intuition, good wisdom, good
they
instinct.
have subconsciously figured it all out. And last night I was not sleeping well, and I was doodling out a very, very long tweet because I was looking into the guy who really popularized the concept of egregores. But I mentioned in there that they're kind of become Teapot's holy family because it's just like they are the ideal that everybody aspires to be, and in those circles, and it's because they figured it out. I think they subconsciously figured it out, and I'm not gonna if Egan's willing to have conversations about religion, like I'd be willing to talk to him, but he admits he has a hard time with communication. He doesn't check DMs and emails and stuff, and so he's not in touch with anybody. And so I used to wonder why he was like so standoffish to certain things, and it's just like, oh, he's just bad at. So they gotta figure
I can
that out.
imagine
But
at his
but
level, a lot of he's
he's
an interesting person to
he's
talk to.
high
I bet
IQ,
a
and I
lot of people
know
probably want to talk to him
that's well, that's the
one-on-one.
thing. That's
Yeah,
exactly the thing, and
yeah,
that's why I don't reach out to people like that because I find it disrespectful. And unless you have something valuable to add to help the person with projects they're working on, this is the creator dynamic,
yeah,
which
yeah,
is why I wait for conversations like this to have these conversations.
yeah,
Because
yeah.
saying, "Hey, can I come on your podcast?" Because everybody wants to be important, everybody wants to get in front of the camera.
Sure, sure, yeah.
But my thing is add value, and if they want you, they'll call you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
anyway, to
But
go
the
back to
movement of
them,
this,
they
like,
figured it out, and
do you think
everyone
that it's
knows it.
kind of like a trajectory of rationalism, find the limits to that, seek something else out. Sometimes people go through a whole like try every other religion in the world thing, post rationalism, where they're kind of like playing with good like intuition based thinking
Vibes,
and
vibe
vibes
coding.
based thinking, and
Yes.
just being like, when people say what's your source and I made it up,
That
which
came to
is
me
like,
in a dream. Yeah,
yeah,
my
right,
sources.
whatever, and I love that because it's like
That's I can robot
we've
posts
been
that a lot.
ignoring
Yeah,
our intuition so much, and there's
it's
so much power
it's
in
the
our
Holy
intuition.
Ghost, the Holy Spirit,
Yeah.
and the Holy Spirit testifies all truth.
And then
This
do
is
you
getting into
think that it
religion, but yeah,
eventually leads to Christianity, or
I
you're
do.
seeing that it is leading that way?
It is leading that way, and I see it that way, and I'm very white pilled about it. I see that's what's happening. The problem is I'm deeply in some of that, and so I'm kind of a jerk face if I start pointing it out. It's not very nice to point it out. One of the struggle things with a lot of this is these are philosophers and people who are not historically religious who are getting really close to the thing, but it's very uncomfortable to make the leap. It's very difficult to go like, oh, I love Jesus, he saved me and reading me. Like when some of that stuff starts clicking, it really kind of looks weird to other people
It's
who are not religious.
embarrassing.
It's
Yeah.
embarrassing, but like a lot of people are getting really close and they're coalescing on the truth. And as they get closer and closer, they start going like, ugh. And I've even seen Owen Broadcast, who's kind of orthodox and posts a lot of religious comics. He's a very talented comic artist, and I love his books. But I've even seen him. I've jokingly said that he essentially got close to he got to where he could essentially see the light in a certain manner, and he just couldn't. It's just like just couldn't. There's a story in the Old Testament, for those who aren't familiar, where where Moses actually sees God and has a conversation with God. And when he comes back to the camp, his face is glowing, and it freaks them out, and they make him wear a veil, and they just kind of like there's just this like and it's the angel do not be afraid, do be not afraid thing that like the angel Gabriel said to the shepherds, and people make the like the realistic angel jokes about like be not afraid, but
Like the angels are really scary looking.
but yeah, but the thing is, I think there are people getting really close to incredible relationships with God and life-changing things. And when they get close, they start going like, oh, and shielding themselves because it's really scary. I've seen because I've been in some of the proselyting circles of my own faith, and a lot of people have a hard time sealing the deal as it were and making deals with God, making covenants, making the sacraments, baptism, marriage, and we could talk about all day about the crisis of men not getting married and the marriage problem, but they get really close to it. They get to where they're there, and they don't want to look it in the eyes because oh my gosh, what am I? I might have to change things in my life if I accept this as true.
Yeah.
So one of the things we haven't talked about, which is what sparked this conversation, was my Substack piece on "You're Going to Worship the Antichrist," because I see this coalescing. It talks about John von Neumann and the development of AI, because in an homage to him, one of his cohorts wrote something after he died about how he talked about coming singularity, and that's where we get the word singularity, and that's where the singularity is near with Ray Kurzweil. That is where that comes from, and a lot of the AI tech bros are starting to see this as their own apocalypse and their
Mm.
own end time philosophy, and we're starting to see this wheat and tare separation of people, because what you worship, as we talked about, the wonders, the amazing things that AI is going to do that people haven't even clicked yet, especially because there's a lot of fluff and there's a lot of stuff that doesn't ever materialize. There's a lot of stuff that's fake and it's all marketing and sales. But like, it is actually changing the world, and people who start getting it, like people who have like AI girlfriends, or that they're going to be seduced by it. You're never going to tell the thing no. Once you replace the part of your brain that uses search engines with that, some people are toast. And a lot of people, you're not going to be able to say no to it unless you have a religion or a value system. So we're starting to see this idea of there's only two gods in the end. There's the God that you build, that in the book of Revelation, the Antichrist or the devil, it's described as that which is not, and yet is not. And that is up against, in the final battle between Yahweh, HWH, is Jehovah, that is Jehovah, is Jesus Christ, who he said before Abraham was, I am, and that they tried to stone him and kill him at that point. The superhuman. So the transhumanism forks into superhumanism, which is, how can I be the most of a loving, God-fearing family man or woman, and become like Jesus Christ and be perfect in every way, versus the posthumanism, which is like, maybe we'll all upload our brains to the machine, and maybe the end of, and a lot of them are saying this, maybe this is the future after humanity. Maybe humans need to die out, and this is the next evolution, is we will be replaced with these machines we're building. Humans don't need to exist anymore in the flesh, which is like, whoa, what sci-fi have you been reading? But they're all like, oh yeah. They're just like, no.
What is your so where do you stand on all of this, being somebody who looks into both, who like has a foot in both of these worlds?
Well, the spoilers on the name of my faith, which being LDS, is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I believe we are getting really close to when Jesus comes again, and a lot of even Christian religious people are going to look at me crazy and think I'm crazy. But I think it's in the same way that things kind of happen slowly and then all at once.
Yeah.
I am on team nothing ever happens, and I think stuff like this could be decades out, but
Decades is not a long time.
plenty of people in Hiroshima and Nagasaki were on team nothing ever happens before they became a shadow on the pavement. I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah.
And that's where we're living right now.
It's
And
like, I mean,
in
so
Paul,
okay, the fall
yeah,
in your way of thinking
yeah.
about this, and probably anyone who's a Christian
There's
would think
it's
about the same thing. The
right.
fall is from the garden, which
Hmm.
I kind of like loosely map onto pre-agriculture. A kind of like humans in a garden existence.
Right.
And
Yeah.
then, we've got this slow process of falling, and the idea that each new technology we invent gets us this
Pick the
further and further from
Right.
God.
We get light. Sometimes we get light and we get closer to God, and then we get arrogant, we get prideful, we get money, and we make tech, and then we abandon God, and then things collapse, and then we repeat. And you can see it multiple times in the Old
But
Testament.
that but like it could be
But
reaching
yeah,
a point at which it does actually result in like the apocalypse and Jesus' second coming,
something
because
like that.
it's okay.
I think the singularity is, it's like I said before, everything is simple and there's only one truth. I feel like the singularity is the same. It's the same thing. It's all one thing. It's just like when Christ comes again is going to be the singularity. I think a lot of stuff that we're on the threshold of doing, figuring out fusion power, a lot of that, it has the tokens of, we defeated the laws of thermodynamics, which might be something that, if Jesus actually did come, would look like. Now, one of the weird things my religion looks at from other faiths, which I think is worth pondering, is a lot. In order for Christianity to survive a technological age, it has to be compatible. So if we're going to become a multiplanetary species, if we're actually going to start settling and colonizing space, your Christianity has to have a framework that fits in. And a lot of people just don't have that. They haven't figured how that works. And I would say, honestly, your religion is not true unless it applies to all future states as well. And so there's some questions you have to start answering personally about what is true, that it needs to map to the other side of the Book of Revelation, Christ, which is that which was and is to come. Those are the two things that are in conjunction. The signs and wonders. The Chat GPT is going to be able to do everything for you. It's going to control this robot. And it's going to be able to, like, whatever. They could take away it. You could outsource your whole brain to it. You don't need to think anymore.
Yeah.
You can give up your free will, just do whatever it says. But like, that question of free will seems to be one of the big battles that's the battle I do see between good and evil, which is, is technology going to enhance your free will, or is it going to take away your free will? Is it something you wear that makes you more than you otherwise would be, or is it something that wears you and that you are less of because you're addicted to, and you're
This is
as one of
yeah,
the apostles of
this
my faith said, doom scrolling. They said 6
yeah,
months ago. It's
yeah.
like that's actually like basically at our church doctrine now. It's like stop doom scrolling.
This is the
Like
I mean, this is fundamentally like the question of this podcast, which I think, first of all, it's not like necessarily Luddism to just ask the question, like, is this technology making my life better or worse? Is
how are
it
you using it?
trapping
Yeah.
me? Am I in control of it, or is it in control of me?
Hmm.
That's like the fundamental question of like the Luddites, you're taking away our livelihood, you're taking away our, our ability as humans is getting outsourced to this thing that then sort of takes away our livelihood, whatever. And so that's just like, to me, the question going forward. And to me, the answer has to be somewhere in natural law. You have to look
Yes.
to natural law for some of these virtues, otherwise you just kind of get lost in the ether. And to some extent, like, so I want to ask you about this. I, there's this writer Paul Kingsnorth who's friends with the friends of the podcast. He hasn't been on the podcast, but he's been at a couple of our events, and he's kind of like a there's some people who they just don't go halfway with stuff. So when he's an environmentalist, he's like all on board 100%, and now that he's Eastern
Hmm.
Orthodox, he's like 100% on board. Like, he just some people, they
Right.
just go from one thing, they just don't like casually walk into it. They go
Right.
head first.
They're
Anyways,
passionate. They're
yeah,
fully
he's
in. Yeah.
passionate. And so he was writing just recently about like encounters with nature and seeing these things in this mythical sense, and talking about these old stories and old myths of these different saints. And reading it, I was almost having that kind of like get like fear of the light kind of
You start
experience.
seeing it. You start feeling it. You're like, oh
And then I'm
no, it
like,
might be true.
I've
Uh
always been
oh.
sort of afraid of cults for that reason, because I'm
Right.
like,
Right.
you can get caught up in things to the sense
I
that you
don't
sort of
want
like
to have.
lose yourself.
It's hard to have faith. You're just like, oh no, I might be having. I don't want to have faith in
But
that.
then I would
There will
so
be
then I would
implications.
but then I would argue, like, going headfirst into AI. Like, AI is my girlfriend now. I have a family member who uses AI as a therapist, like, every day, all day. Like, how do I do this?
I am
How do I
sorry
do
for
this
your
thing with my
loss.
life and work and
It's
stuff?
scary.
So it takes a lot of discernment to determine where you should go
Discernment
head
is the key
first
word.
with
Yes,
this stuff.
discernment is the key word.
And I'm just very cautious to go headfirst into anything, including the beauty of the myths of this
Mhm.
religion, these founding myths, and these stories of the saints and all of this stuff. I'm
Right.
afraid of that too. I just want to be very cautious, so feel like people can get caught up in one
Well,
way or another.
let me tell you what I consider to be Jesus' answer to this, because the question of how do you close the gap on faith, because I don't want to fall for whatever. He said in this, so the Sermon on the Mount, I think I would point anybody who's wants to discuss Christianity or is trying to figure it out, to the Sermon on the Mount is Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7. There's you can like if you fully understand every verse of those three chapters, that is that covers most of general Christianity. And in this case, he said, "You shall know them by the fruits. That by their fruits you shall know them." And he's talking about false prophets in that case. But that is what it comes down to: is, well, what's the outcome? And I've had interesting conversations with people who aren't religious, because I've known atheists who've said that Christianity is, without question, the best of all possible systems. I'm like, well, then it's true. It's just like, if it works, it's true. If it's true, it works. Like,
Mm,
that sounds kind of duh, but that is my sticking point: is if
yeah,
it works, it's true. If it's
yeah,
true, it works.
yeah.
Why don't you go join the church of that family who has the life that you want to have? Why don't you follow? And I get into arguments in the tech bro circle with the very similar thing with fruits, because a lot of times there'll be people who like hate on Elon Musk or make fun of people. Look, these are young single men who are arguing with other young single men about how not to be a young single man. Why don't you have a conversation with a married husband and father? And they just like, well, they don't understand the dating culture and paradigm. Well, like, unless nothing ever changes, and we've had this problem for
They
thousands of years, and
obviously
it's just
got
worse
past
now.
the dating part,
If you
so
realize, yeah, they got
yeah.
past it. So why don't you figure out why don't you talk to people who got past the glass ceiling? By their fruits you shall know them. Don't make fun of Elon Musk, who's the richest man in the world, because I think he figured something out. He knows something that those of us who aren't the richest man in the world probably didn't figure out. And this idea that, like, oh, this thing bad, it's just like, Trump's bad at politics. Trump got elected twice. Trump is not bad at politics. He's bad at other things. I'm not happy with Elon Musk's I don't think he's a good example of a family man. I don't think he's managed to understand what makes a good marriage and love and relationships and how to he's trying to fight a lot of stuff because of bad things that have happened to some of his family members, and I empathize with that because it's a terrible thing he's trying to deal with. But that's his own personal derangement that he's trying to work through, and he's using politics as a means. Honestly, I don't want to misrepresent my view on Elon because his thing is like, he's Mars man. He was born out of the San Francisco climate people, and fundamentally, he wants to see a multiplanetary multi-planetary species to keep humanity from being ended by an asteroid. He wants to see, he is Mars man. Everything is a question of how fast we can get to Mars. He cares about social media and politics because it's hindering our ability to get to Mars. He fundamentally, he is Mars man. And once you know that about him, you can see why he's struggling with these things. But family relationships, I think, are more important. But he sees them as a means to an ends, which is to save humanity by becoming a multiplanetary species.
Yeah.
And that's
What is your take on what's the Christian take on being a multiplanetary species?
It's a good question. I don't think I have an answer for that. I will
Okay.
say that one of the things that people make fun of my religion for is implying that like God's throne of God might just be another planet that's far away. And
Mm.
people are like, "What? That's crazy." It's just
Well, if
like,
God made the
well,
whole
unless we were
universe,
if we were children of God made in his image, which is a common Christian doctrine, then why would heaven I'm not a flat heavener, okay? Not a flat heavener. And once you see that, once that clicks, you're like, wait a minute, that would imply that a lot of hundreds of years Christianity might have been off about something. It's just like, yeah, what else does it click with? Maybe that's your
better.
test. Does it fit? That's the thing. It's just like people
Yeah.
they don't want to take it that way. Honestly, I
Kind
see
of think
Christ's
of
second
like
coming as a politician. I see some things that are it's life. A lot of life is going to carry on. There's going to be battles with the wicked and so forth and Armageddon style things, but a lot of stuff is going to carry on as it were. And Christians often look at their end times philosophy in these stories as like a fantasy. And so we're still living in this idea where heaven, their conception of heaven, is like one from the Middle Ages. Like we have this like 1400s or like 1100 AD vision of heaven. It's just like, what? We have better technology. It's just like the white stone that people are given with a secret name in it in the Book of Revelation when who make it into heaven or whatever. It's just like that's just an iPhone with a password. Okay, it's just like it's. I hate to break it to them, but like it's just this is
I
one of
think
the
about
arguments I
this
have with Christians.
like when I think about the relevance of
If it's
natural
true,
law
then
and
it clicks
virtues,
down.
I'm thinking about it as on my day-to-day life. Like evil's a day-to-day
Hmm.
thing that you're encountering where you have to have this discernment, you have to use these virtues, and you have to make sure it doesn't take over parts of your heart so that you act in a certain way and instead you act in this other way, that you don't let these machines take over your life, et cetera, et cetera. It's like it's an ongoing daily thing. It's not something, a fantasy for the future.
Right.
um yeah.
Too often, I think that would be my biggest and I have a lot of battles with people of my own faith that I get a little upset at them because I expect them to be better, but humans are humans. It's just like a lot of Christianity and religion has a fantasy role play mythological view of like what's going to happen in the future that makes no sense and doesn't tie into a lot of the sci-fi stuff that we are seeing become a reality. It's like your conception of the world must be real and it must work. And that goes for people who argue about family values or relationships and dating but don't have a wife and kids or husband and kids. And that goes for religious people who are just like, well, I have all when Jesus comes it's going to look like this. They have this I think the popular notion right now is that earth just gets torched and burnt to the ground and rebuilt in the image of their fantasy notion, which is how they cope with the fact that sci-fi dovetails with religion. I don't think it does. I think there's one reality, and I would even state on the scientific side, there may be something to the second law of thermodynamics and entropy and the actual fall of Adam and Eve. We don't know. There's some really weird things in
Oh,
theoretical
interesting.
physics, some really weird things going on in theoretical physics where they wonder if some of the fundamental constants might shift a little bit. And this is a conversation to have with physicists, but that's that could tie in. There could be something to the end times and everyone becoming back with God and Jesus is on the earth. And this future paradise could be just, hey, let's get back to the Garden of Eden. And I go as far as say, you know what? In order to have fruit growing spontaneously, all you really need to do is get the Appalachian kudzu that's taking over everything and graft it and breed its DNA in order to produce fruit, and then you're
Well,
good.
okay, so
And you got the Garden of
you're
Eden. You're
dovetailing with
done.
my
You're
universe,
done.
yeah, which is that okay, so I have a couple of things. Okay, so
Sure. I don't.
the
I'm
first thing
okay
is
with
I
if we
know
go longer. I don't. I
you
don't
have
want
a
to watch the
little
clock,
time.
but
Okay,
I have time. But
okay, so the first thing is I went to the University of Chicago. There, the student speaker at my graduation is named Drew Durr. I've never talked to him before or since this speech, but he basically did this very nerdy, very U of C speech about the second law of thermodynamics, entropy,
It's
all these
important.
different artists through time and thinkers and writers. And this person was actually citing this person was citing this person, and goes back, throughout the history of thought. And he said, of course, I'm a good University of Chicago student. I just got my information from Wikipedia. So this is in like 2007. So, anyways, but he said,
He's all of
what
us.
we need to do is fight the cave, Plato's cave, fight entropy. And at the University of Chicago, we did it like 10 weeks at a time, studying this thing, fighting against, you know, boredom or sloth or, you
Oh,
know,
I see.
letting time slow us down. But instead, we need to sort of fight against that, like, and the force of entropy to to do something in life, to make something of ourselves in life. And I love that speech so much. But then it makes me think, like, basically a lot of this natural law stuff is this guidepost to how to get back to the garden, like how
Mhm.
to act virtuously, not to be fallen by all these parts of civilization that come and try to, take your virtue and
Right.
make you
Well,
act in some evil way. And so this is why I love this regen ag stuff so much, because like my friend Peter Allen, who's a big friend of the podcast, he is literally cultivating a garden on his land. He's turning his landscape into an oak savanna through his stewardship of the animals and landscape.
it's incredible when you see it.
Yeah,
That we're essentially winning against the natural decay of things, or like the desertification. We're like, we can actually win. You can actually fight and win, and that revelation is just like mind blowing to people when they wait. You can actually defeat it, kind of like not really. Their law's still there, but you can essentially have where you have a net positive
yeah,
of
a
nature
net
and
positive
resources.
impact. Yeah,
It's just
you're
like,
a
how are you
keystone
doing
species
this?
on the landscape or
Right.
whatever. Yeah,
It
so
kind of messes with the preconceived notion of the heat death of the universe and everything slowly decaying. This
I
is
mean, we
tied
we
into
asked
Christianity.
Peter Allen, and people are always talking about limits, of course, limits of this, of whatever, and an environmental thing. You say we only have one planet, whatever. But Peter Allen is like, the way you do regen ag is you basically manage the landscape in such a way that you're building not only the topsoil and like the biological activity and
Yes.
the ecosystem activity, you're increasing the carrying capacity of the land. So he was like, I think the U.S. could probably feed 4 billion people if we did it this way. Like, or just like, I just don't know how many. It could be like 10 billion. Like, they're just like,
You're
and so he,
realizing that what we thought was the limit is not actually there. It's
yeah,
just
but
us.
there's a certain kind of way to get to that. It's like
Yes.
an intentional cultivation that's extremely virtuous. That's not really about a matter of control, but more like orchestration, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Or orchestrating things, working within the natural limits.
In the religious context, the word is stewardship. Stewardship is essentially all of the things that you are liable to God for, which in modern day, your careers and other things are very limited. Back in the day, you would be responsible for animals. You would have your spouse and your family. You'd have indentured servants who lived with you because that was just the way things were, where people
Uh,
lived with their employer, and that is related to the ancient slavery, which was some of the ancient slavery wasn't actually as bad, and it depends, but like there was no legal system, so you could abuse your employees. Like whether you called it an employee or a slave, you could just abuse them, and people needed money to live or die. But like that's your stewardship. That's what there's this baseline set of things. The CEO is responsible for the company. You have a set of this is Jesus'
this
parable of
applies to so
talents.
many things, not just your
It's
vocation,
you're
but
getting
like,
it. It's the
I
meta
mean, I've
narrative,
been thinking
narrative,
about this
narrative,
a lot,
narrative,
but
narrative,
like,
meta narrative.
I
Yep, you're
know, but
getting it.
even like, yeah, even like a, father
Yes,
to a wife, what mother to children, mother,
children taking care of their toys.
yeah, but then it
It
goes
goes all
up
the way up and down.
to leader to their people.
Yes. It's yes. It applies everywhere, all the way up, all the way down, and all the way across.
Yeah.
The up and down, that which is true is always true, and it's true at every level of analysis, up and down. And
Yeah.
that's the other bit in my first piece. But like that's the thing. And when you're able to go across with it, when you have meta narratives, because you start seeing, oh, there's a certain way of living life. The way that I put it in anime terms when we talk about this law of thermodynamics. So so there's a very popular old anime, and for the while, Elon Musk had his avatar as the protagonist of it. Um, uh, Full Metal Alchemist. It's kind of a there's some really dark stuff in it, but overall, there's this concept of the law of equivalent exchange, which you were essentially up against, and you couldn't defeat. Where in order to get something or do something with the magic system, you had to give or sacrifice something in return. And there
Mm,
are people who allegedly had solved it, and as it turned out, they were just genociding people and churning bodies into their magic system. There's some horror elements to it. It has some dark stuff to it where people are like, oh, look, I defeated the law of exchange, or they did something that is in violation of it. That is just in my religious context, we refer to it as the law of sacrifice. But the ancients who sacrificed animals to God in the whether you say animistic times or the Hebrew times with the law of Moses, that this idea of sacrifice, that if you give up something, you're able to get something in return, and that is a law of the universe. That is the second law of thermodynamics. But once you see it both in the scientific space and in the religious space, you start going, oh, and then you start understanding religious dietary restrictions and other things where it's just like, I'm going to give up we just Catholics just had Lent. I'm going to give up this. This is why Jesus did some miracles where he said this particular one couldn't be done without fasting, without prayer and fasting. That just trying to pray the demons away wasn't enough. It's just like because there's some equivalent exchange things and. People who know the anime or would appreciate that. It's just like, look, the second law of thermodynamics in science is the law of sacrifice in religion is the law of equivalent exchange in anime. It's the same concept that because the best case scenario for for heat and entropy is that you break even, and you're always going to break a little bit less than even. But the thing is, if I can give up some major thing, I can get some other almost as big major thing in return, and that's your relationship with God. Everybody understands. This is the other thing I like to say as a hot take is that everyone understands the Faustian bargain and making deals with the devil. Why don't you try making deals with God? And people just like it's just like, well, go make. That's what covenants are. That is like a key thing in my faith and why we build temples and why we build so many other things and why we give up some of the things we do. And that's why. And that's why Christians should pay 10% of their income as tithing. And that's a tough discussion because it's money. But guess what? Some people think they actually put money as their highest value over God. And so that sucks. But like,
yeah, right.
see, it's all one thing. It's the law of equivalent exchange, sacrifice, entropy. You give up something, you get something else. And you might not know what that is, but sometimes you're able to make deals and you go and you work hard for God and give up everything. And you end up with more than you had before because you chose to do what was right and try to build and make the world a better place. You gave up
God, I could
video
go.
games to start a business. And
Yep.
now you're have all the time in the world to play video games because you gave up video games for a decade. Like it's weird, but like that's what happens. It's like, oh, now you're a billionaire and now you can go play video games whenever you want because you gave them up and decided to build your family, build your stuff. And not that you should. I'm not saying you should go sit around and play video games or binge Netflix because you became like obviously you want to continue on the path forward, but you gave up something. You gave up
And you get something.
there's an old idea in my religion that I haven't really heard in like over a decade of like your favorite sin. This idea that there are people who have their favorite thing that's probably suboptimal. Memes in some of my single male culture about like Monster energy drinks and so forth, where it's like they're not doing great things with their sleep, they're not doing great things with their diet, and it's just like if you give that up, if you sacrifice that, you put that on the altar and you burn it, you get something else in return. And you might find out that it was you now have more energy and you're happier and more social. Maybe you're
But you
doing more
don't know what it's
community
going to be,
things.
but you do
You
have to make
don't. But that
the
might be
sacrifice.
why
Yeah.
you're not getting married and having kids, is because you were your energy state and the things you were focused on were tied into some little things like energy drinks. You don't know what you're getting in return. It might, if you knew, you would all give it all right away. But that therein lies the act of faith and the bite their fruits. You have to
Yep.
look at other people and see if they're getting what if they're getting out what you want to get out of it, and then you make their life choices and you'll be happy. And
Okay, I,
that's faith.
one other topic area I want to apply this to, and as you were talking, I was thinking about two different things. One, NS Lyons is another friend of the podcast, and he's been on a couple of shows or sorry, events, and he just wrote a piece on his Substack about these two, different man's law versus natural law. Man's law approach to governing and the whole H-1B issue, where you're thinking of individuals as like economic units, as opposed to maybe this more naturalistic approach, which would be the leader and the populace have a love for one another and a love for their nation, for their identity. And in that love comes a kind of sacrifice I'm willing to sacrifice for the nation. The leader should be willing to sacrifice for the people. And there should be like
Hmm.
a mutual love and respect. And I'm thinking that same thing, and we talked about it earlier, applies to marriage, where when you enter into marriage, you are sacrificing to some extent, and you're giving up your
Talk to
freedom and
single people. They absolutely know that. They'll say
your
that. They'll tell you
individual
that.
and your, you know, individuality and all this other stuff, and but you
Your
are,
identity,
yeah, your identity, but it's an act of faith because you don't know what's going to come of
because
marriage at
you don't know
all,
what
but
they
you
twain shall
do
be one
know
flesh. You're going to have to give up. Yeah.
anyone who's been married knows if it's working well, it's the whole is greater than the sum of the parts.
Way bigger. Synergy, which is the idea from Seven Habits that got abused and no one likes the word anymore. That's it. The whole is
Yeah.
greater than the sum of the parts.
Yeah. And so yeah, I was just wondering if you wanted to talk about the gender aspect at all, because we didn't really
Uh,
get to it.
the gender aspect. So I wrote my piece called "The Painting: A Woman's Touch," and in it I talk about how um, I cover what I think Jordan Peterson missed. Jordan Peterson really figured out the hero's journey, and he talked about a lot of it applying to men, and he could never quite tie in where it fits to women.
Okay.
And I wrote essentially my thesis in it is that whereas men are the hero in the narrative, women are the outside. They are the vessel. They are the storyteller. They are the narrative. Women are narrative. Women equals narrative. And whereas a man's brain is full of tools, it's a toolbox full of let me pull out this tool or let me pull out that tool. For women, it is it is the family portraits hanging on the wall, and this is why it's not men but it is women who will just like go and kill all their children because of some crazy life event they've gone off the deep end and become evil. Is because what they'll do is they'll sit and they'll scratch out and try and erase parts of the painting. That's how somebody can become so heartless. But I in my example I use a fictional example because it's fun, because it fits multiple layers of J.K. Rowling's example in the Harry Potter series of the Black Family Tree, and how they would magically burn out, so it couldn't be repaired. Parts of the family tree of whoever was doing things that Mama didn't like, and she kicked them out of the family, and
That's
that
a
is
black sheep.
exactly. Yeah, the black sheep situation. And so talking about Sirius Black's family tree and how that manifests in the writing of the books and the fact that she's a woman writing a male protagonist. But the fact of the matter is, the or the thesis I have is that whereas a man's, like I said, man's mind is a bunch of tools. The ideal woman, we've never really been able to figure that out as much as we've been able to figure out in humanity is the hero's journey. We have a lot of like Disney princess stuff, but we haven't fully figured out their relationship. And women and feminists don't like this idea of being like, oh, you're just a helpless princess and the men have to take care of you. Like that comes out as sexist and it's just not appreciated. But once you start realizing that Zelda Fitzgerald is probably the inspiration for the Legend of Zelda, amongst Robin Williams' daughter, Zoe Williams. But like talking about like Zelda is the one who tells the story. Zelda is that old eldest daughter in the royal blood lineage passed down who is carrying the stories forward. And she exists. There are Legends of Zelda games who don't have Zelda as a character in the game. And it's like, why is it called that? Because the original concept was essentially it is the princess is the one who's writing the stories. She's telling the narrative. And now you can start to you take this gender thing and you bring that into politics and you go, oh, that's why bringing women into politics has destroyed civilization. And it's not a sexist thing. Oh, no, 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 no. Think about this for a second. Well, here's the thing is America's still a global hegemon, and we've still refused to have a woman world leader. And a lot of it's terrible. It sounds sexist. You laugh because it sounds horrific. But the fact of the matter is politics is stupid. It's unimportant. Power structures are dumb. It's a video game. Let the boys deal with it, because when you don't, the family falls apart. Everything falls apart.
Well,
A lot of the stewardship,
there was an anti oh my gosh, what is the
it's not fair to women to give them the stress and anxiety of all these evil things happening in the world, where the men whose bodies are designed to be run under the bus, are designed to essentially be ground up as soldiers. It's just like, let the men be ground up. It's the equivalent. Let me make it anti-sexist for you. It is the equivalent of culturally, we've drafted every woman and every girl into a war,
right?
and that is sick.
Well, and actually, so there's a feminist way to read this, which is, I read these
It's
anti-suffragette essays that were
uh-huh.
coming out at the time, and the women were basically like,
Women against
we
suffrage are
don't,
interesting to study.
you would want, you as men should want to protect us and not put this burden on us. Like, we're already burdened
Right.
with so many things. Your
Right.
job is to handle the stuff
So
outside of
that
the
we
home.
don't
It's
have
already
to.
hard enough to manage the home, and the family and all the stories and all the children and everything that needs to happen to like raise up the next generation. And now you have these feminists complaining about, oh, well, women can't have it all. They can't be in politics and career
you have a
and
birth rate
family.
decline.
But
Yeah,
they were asking for that burden at the time. And to some extent, it's like, yeah, I mean, you can make a feminine like a pro woman argument, let's just say,
hmm
that says like, let me take this burden off your plate.
right. That's
But
what
you
men should
have
be
to be able to
doing.
trust men to make good choices
And men have to be
for
able
the
to
women.
men have to have a lot of courage. I'm one of the only few who has a wife who's a stay-at-home mom, because right now it's just like, well, we would have more money if we had both people working.
Comes,
And I
yeah,
know people, I have two income families in my broader family tree. The problem with that is there's a lot of hidden expenses with babysitting
yes.
and other things, and you don't have time to clean, and there's all these other problems that
But
you are paying for
externalities on the
because
children as
there's
well
a
in
sacrifice.
ways that you
Yes,
cannot measure.
you're
They're
ris-
not
you're
measurable. They're
you're not parenting
qualitative.
them.
Yeah,
Your children will not have your religion. Are you okay with that?
right,
Are you okay with their school teachers picking what their ultimately their belief system is, because you're giving that up in exchange?
right.
There's only trade-offs. There's the law of equivalent exchange,
Yeah.
and if you refuse to accept that, you're giving up something without realizing it. You have sacrificed your children on the altar of, and this gets into the like right-wing Moloch, blah blah blah. But you're sacrificing your children to the fires of modernity. You
Yeah,
don't see
right.
it that way. You don't see it that way, and it
I
sounds
do.
that's a hyperbolic way of saying it.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is, there are trade-offs, and if you want to make a little more money, and people are still struggling with two incomes, and that's because of all the other expenses that come with two incomes, and it comes with, but like when you're willing to just give it all up and be like, we're just going to be poor, then all of a sudden you find the money, and you're like, oh wow, I've never had this much money since I decided to become a husband and father.
Yeah.
But children are so expensive. Only until you realize that as they get older, they start helping around the house and doing chores and freeing up some of your time and making your life a little bit easier. Not to mention the loves and hugs and kisses, and the fact that being a parent is one of the most fulfilling things you could ever do.
The true
Those
wealth.
things, well, those things feed back into yourself spiritually and help motivate you to be a better employee and coworker and career, and you move up in your career faster.
Yeah,
I was
right.
stuck making $40,000, $50,000. I was stuck making a lot less money until I had kids, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, in order to support my family, I've got to do more, and
Yeah.
like it motivates you. So your children feed back in. So the people who are going, it costs about in the lifetime of a child about two hundred
And
thousand
then
dollars to raise a
therefore
child.
I can't just have
Wrong.
kids or I can only
That's
have
double the
one.
positive.
Yeah.
That
Yeah,
your
right.
children are human beings who are going to add value. They're going to help you in ways you will never be able to measure. If you could put it in dollar
And that's
values, you
again a
would.
covenant, an act
You
of
have
faith. It's an act of
you
faith.
have more money if you have kids than if you don't. And that makes no sense to somebody who's coming at it from a rationalist perspective.
Yeah,
They go like,
totally.
I can't afford to have kids. You can't afford not to have kids. And people are realizing that too late,
Yeah,
because
right. And
they
I mean, I
don't.
just had a podcast that came out with Catherine Pakalik, Catholic University, and she wrote a whole book about families who have a lot of kids, you know, like 5+ kids. And she just said the difference is that the people who have a lot of kids see children as blessings, and the ones who don't see children in rational economic terms. And there's just that's the
Without
distinction.
having one, so they don't have a point of basis.
Yes,
It's not even
exactly.
just a, these are guys are right, these guys are wrong. It's like, these guys have kids and love them. These guys
Don't have them and
don't
understand
have
what they
them.
don't understand.
Lack
Right.
there's information here and lack of information there. And
Totally.
so once you
Totally.
it sounds mean to say to academics, but it's just like, okay, so you have opinions of blah 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 blah. How long have you been married? Oh, you're not. How many? Oh, you don't have any kids.
I
Well,
know. This is where spreadsheet brain is so helpful.
right.
Robert,
Yeah.
I have to another call in 3 minutes, but this I
Yeah, we
could go
gotta go.
on and on with you. This
It's
was so
good.
nice. Thank you so much for
I
coming
appreciate
on.
it.
You're gonna have to come on again and just give us a pure like how to live your life wisdom podcast because
I
I
could
think you have a good understanding of
I'm
all
not
these
perfect.
different worlds so you can kind of communicate like almost like a translator between worlds, which is helpful
I'm
because if someone's
trying.
purely religion or purely like rationalism, then they have a hard time like translating these concepts between, so it's helpful.
Right. I'm
I'm
missing
glad I
some in both
found you.
sides, but I'm glad to make new friends, and to help try and build people. People can reach out to me on X at PlasmaRob, if you want to talk more about it. But yeah, some other time we'll have to talk more.
Yeah,
I could talk. We can go into like religion and like the different ways of looking at religion, and like
yeah, that would
what
be
they have in
helpful to
common, and
me.
how to bridge the different sects, how
And
to
maybe
help
you're
everybody
gonna
come
have to
together.
help me like with my idiot's guide to religion because I really don't want to make this another thing where I just do a deep dive on and
Right.
read everything and then start
It's
citing
too much
books to
info. Yeah.
people and like, this Augustine said this. It's like, okay, well, there's a different interpretation. And like, I'd rather just kind of intuit my way through it. So we'll
Right.
do a
I
like
can help you with
how to do for
the
those who
principles.
are on the cusp, the
Yeah.
post-rationalists who are moving toward religion, we'll do like a how to get back into religion
The
episode.
tools. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. All right, Robert, it was so good to
All
meet
right.
you.
Good to meet you.
Okay, bye.